So, do you want to give us the name of the track and everything? So
yeah, the track's called Masochist. Just want me to roll through it?
Yeah.
Cool.
You're going to play, it comes the first version of it. And
yeah, well, this is one of the first versions of it. Basically, we just had the idea to get a track with that sort of started off sounding it was based in the jungle, and just dropped with like what we hope would be one of the heavier tunes around at the time. But when we started off, we were just going through a lot of audiobooks, trying to find the right samples, and we ended up with this guy talking about death in the jungle, and that was the name of the book. And you can't really go wrong with a title like that.
It's guaranteed, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But start off with these ones from...
Once we jumped off the boat and into the jungle, we cranked up the volume and marched to our own drummer.
Basically just try to add a few crickets, old sounding brass and old sounding beats.
So did you sample that sort of stuff, or did you actually put it together?
We did sample that, yeah. We try not to do that usually, but it's just death in the jungle. You can't not.
No, indeed.
So it's one of the first versions of it. Once we jumped off the boat and into the jungle, we cranked up the volume and marched to our own drummer. Many nasty things could await me. Noise discipline had to be maintained. Sounds carried incredibly far in the jungle. Heard by any bad boys? Suddenly my brain screamed and stopped. And my right leg froze in midair.
Yeah, the beat was mainly hits from different sample CDs, hits from congas and everything, all mixed together and EQ'd differently.
Yeah.
And then just gradually swung. So
Screamed and stopped. And my right leg froze in midair. My heart slammed in my throat. The next few seconds took forever. My hands were shaking, and my nervous system was in some kind of shock. Then, silence got blown apart.
the roll wasn't supposed to be there.
So did you do for the beginning bit with all the percussion stuff? Is that all just done straight audio into innuendo, just laid out there?
Or just audio. We usually do that sort of stuff in Contact, but it was just, I was finding sometimes like with audio it's just a lot quicker to just chuck it in and edit it in keyboards.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, that was just straight audio. That synth was just a patch I made in, distorted and made in Zeta. This one.
So when you got a sound like that, how do you kind of go about making?
Basically just start by resetting everything, just starting clean, just because I just find it easier that way to make some sounds. Some sounds it's easy to just do presets and then work from there. But with this sound, we originally were trying to make a bass from another song that we heard out, and we thought, well, that's a cool bass. We'll see if we can try and make it. And we ended up with something like this. we just tweaked it. Added some of the effects in Zeta, sort of added an LFO to the pulse width of one of the oscillators in Zeta, which was oscillating like faster depending on how high you went up the keyboard.
Yeah. So it tracks across the keyboard as you play it.
Yeah. Well, gets the depth of the LFO gets wider as you go along. Yeah, well, once we had that, I mean, we had some beats up and together, mainly breaks and hits that we'd made ourselves, and just simple stuff like that. I mean, it's mainly just separating the drums into, you'll have the main drums like kick and snare and all that, and then you'll basically have all our breaks which will sit underneath them, so it's sort of separated into everything lying beneath it, and then the main stuff.
So you got the movement in the mid range and then just kick and snares kind of.
Yeah, pretty much. But we try and do it less with sort of EQ and more with getting rid of transients and compression and stuff like that, just to keep the natural sound and stuff. But I mean, we'll usually have something like that to start off with. And then just add everything on top.
So you're getting a lot of power from the kick and snare that you're overlaying over top of the break, rather than the actual breaks, the rolling parts of it.
Definitely. I mean, the breaks are basically just acting there to fill it out.
Yeah.
And the main power is just coming from the kick and snare, which we use to push a compressor on the master bus down. So basically everything revolves around the kick and snare being right, so I can push the compressor down enough for that sort of slamming effect.
Yeah.
But
so what do you, when you're doing, just even basically programming the kick and the snare and stuff, what do you, again, is it just audio, or are you using something like contacts, or?
Sometimes audio, but in this we're using Contact 1.
Right.
Got a few things going on there. We do quite a bit of audio stuff. That's how it'll start off. I mean, sounding pretty basic.
Yeah.
And the old version of Contact wasn't too easy to cut up loops in, so by audio, but now that Contact 2's come up, we do more of that in Contact.
Yeah.
So, should I open up the new one?
Yeah. So do you do, how much kind of shape it, like if you're using Contact, do you just literally use it as a playback, or do you actually shape stuff within it using sort of the filters and the effects and bits in there, because of stuff like that, the kind of...
Bit of both, to be honest. Like, we use a trick a lot of assigning an envelope to the to one of the EQs, for like if we don't have the way something like has a bottom end that sustains, but we still want to keep the tops, we'll just use an envelope to take down the gain on that. So I mean, a lot of it's spent doing that.
Right. So yeah, you use the beats and use the sounds to interact and kind of build it. Yeah, shape it.
We don't really use the distortion or reverbs that much because they're a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
Let's find this. But yeah, most of it's just envelopes and simple EQ. So even though we tend to have a lot of tracks going on with this stuff, it's just best to keep everything as simple as it can, because otherwise you just end up in a mess.
Yeah, get lost with what you're... So is the track kind of, when you like start off like that, you've got that idea and stuff, do you kind of plan out how you want the track to sort of arrangement-wise or kind of move, or is it much more about the feel of, I mean, and obviously it has certain things you want it to do anyway, but is it a lot to do with the feel of what comes out of the track? Does that determine it, or is it always?
It depends what sort of track it is. If it's a really musical track, we try and get all the sort of musical parts and the ideas and all that down first, and then go back and do the mix after we've got the song down. But if it's one of the songs that are designed just for the dance floor, we'll usually like it might even only be 16 bars until like a week before it's due for mastering, and then we'll slowly lay it out. But I mean, for those sort of tunes, you really got to get the mix right first. So I mean, we don't even lay it out till it's really late.
So is it about that idea beyond the arrangement? It's just that kind of sound and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. More about the sounds than the sequence.
Yeah.
This is the finished arrangement.
Once we jumped off the boat and into the jungle, we cranked up the volume and marched to our own car. Many nasty things could await me. No, the next few seconds took forever. My hands were shaking, and my nervous system was in some kind of shock. Then, silence got blown apart.
Yeah, tracks like this is just mainly about the mix. So all those versions, I mean, we must have done like over 100 of them. We just spent on trying to get the mix right. Yeah.
So do you, how in terms of doing the mix, do you do it all here right up to the final point, or do you?
Or in the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we do a lot of testing around. Like we just got a shitty little stereo downstairs, which we test a lot of stuff on. Testing stuff in friends' cars and stuff like that, and obviously at clubs. So, I mean, I find in clubs especially you find out what's wrong fairly quickly. And yeah, that's basically just it. And I just find if you can get an average of what things sound like, you can get a fairly good idea of what's wrong with it and what needs to be fixed.
Do you, so, you know, before, from a point, you know, going from the initial point right up to what you're ready to, and happy to kind of release, how many times do you kind of play it out and come back and tweak and kind of, well, I mean, obviously that's getting less each time you do it, because you get more kind of idea of what you're after.
Well, there's two ways. I mean, we can obviously just keep, I mean, we'll do like, maybe like 130 steps of a project, just add to it every time. Either that, or what's happening lately is we seem to do like quite a few versions of tracks that we like, and we'll just render every one, stick it on a CD, and just test that out everywhere, and basically cross off the ones that we don't think work as they go along, pick the best of that and move on with it. If that happens again, we just go through the same thing again. So, yeah.
Like a dance floor track, have you got like a kind of a checklist, I guess, of the things you want, you know you need or you want for it to happen?
Basically, I guess these days it just has to be energetic and loud, and I mean, in order for that to happen, like, there's got to be some compression used along the way, and basically our thing is just trying to get that compression right at every stage. I guess it's trying to balance it, because we don't really put a lot of compression on anything. It's more putting a little bit on maybe like one instrument, putting a little bit on the bus that instrument's assigned to, and then putting a little bit on the master as well, so it all sort of ties in without actually squashing anything too much. But yeah.
And in terms of arrangement, do you have kind of set things?
Well, I mean, the tracks for DJs, so
Yeah.
you have to sort of stick to some sort of formula more or less. Usually in blocks of 64 bars, like you have 64 for the intro, 64 for like a main drop, and then maybe 16, 32 breakdown, and then 64 again. But I mean, with tracks like Masochist, I think it was 51, which messed some people up a bit. But in a way, that was a good thing, because no one sort of tried to mix it in the middle of the set. They had to open the set and not play it.
You kind of control it a little bit, yeah. How come, was it again 51 because it suited what you were doing?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. I mean, really try not to make tracks just because so-and-so wants to play a mix of Fabric tonight or whatever.
That's what I'm kind of getting at, whether or not you do the blueprint, because you know that.
I guess that comes into again about how strong the track is. If it's a really strong track and you know that people are going to have to open with it at the beginning of their set, it's, you know, you can pretty much do whatever you want to the intro. If it's a track that you want to have, that you want to keep its staying power, to be around longer than 2 months, and maybe whatever, you've got to keep to that formula, or people just won't play it.
You've got to make it easy for them to use it, I guess. So I guess with this really, it's kind of how you kind of bring and work with like real instruments and that kind of sound and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you just mainly start with the riff, or just a piece that we want to get out. So we might start with. I mean, that's basically all we had at first.
Yeah.
We're just playing on the keyboard, and Gaz will come in and go, you know, that's we could get that down. And from there, basically everything just comes around it, as opposed to us just trying to get a sound and work that sound. So we'll basically start off with a riff like that and decide where else we can take it.
Yeah.
So we might start off like adding Latin drums or bringing some bass, which works with some acoustic bass samples. Yeah. Sound really dodgy, but we try not to quantize it, just to make it sound a bit more live. I mean, you don't even notice it when the track's playing. So I mean, yeah, we also got some acoustic guitar in there, but that only came about, you know, once we got a lot of the track done. We asked this guy, who's actually Natalie Imbruglia's band guitarist, to come in and do some stuff on it. So, but I mean, that came later. I mean, after we've done all that, we usually left wondering how the hell to make it into a drum and bass tune.
That's what I'm kind of curious about, when you kind of got an idea like that, and how you kind of decide that.
Well, I guess we tend to, you know, do like maybe 3 versions. We'll think of different ways we can take it, and I mean, it's usually best with these sort of tracks to try and separate the intro from the main part if you are going to just drop them to straight out drum and bass. But with this, we wanted to combine the two, so we, you know, try to keep the same instruments, try to drop with similar drums but just a drum and bass tempo. So can't do more. tracks like these, it's I think it's pretty important to try and not overproduce them, because with the more dance floor tracks, you can go to town compressing everything, getting everything right and EQing it. But with stuff like this, if you ever do it, it just ends up sounding unnatural, I think. So we try and keep a lot of it raw, but still produce it enough to give it a good sound.
Yeah.
Still work in the club.
So when you've got, like when you get the guys coming to do the guitar stuff, how do you kind of, you just literally plug him in and record, or do you?
No, well, he was on acoustic,
so
we
it's literally
just
like
mic'd up with the NT too, which I wasn't sure about, but I mean it did a really good job in the end. We also took the signal from the DI, but I'm not really a fan of acoustic DIs, so we ended up scrapping that. But I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. We had the guitar directly here. Which sounded a bit tinny, so we got the NT2 take of the same thing. And this sounds a lot, a lot more cool.
To it, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's plucky,
more
so
real, yeah.
ended up going with that.
And then did you, I mean, how much editing did you end up doing, or did you, what you got was?
Quite a bit, to be honest, on that. I was hoping not to try and make it feel more live, but with drum and bass stuff, it needs to, it's so fast you can't really afford to have notes everywhere. So I mean, if I bring that up. I mean, for a simple phrase like this, that's, quite a lot of editing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there were just parts where it didn't really have the feel, so I needed to go in and sort of get it. So,
Just cut things into fit.
yeah, I mean, occasionally you would just hear the sound of it crossfading, but I mean, in the overall mix of the track, it just sounds a lot better.
Yeah.
And for the intro, we kept it quite raw anyway.
Give that feel to it.
Yeah.
The opening sound,
Yep.
keyboard sound. You kind of go through how.
There was two sounds that made it up. First one was one which we made in Reactor, which was this old sounding synth which we created, which is that thing. Basically just because we wanted to use that sound for a while. And there was two other synths. There was a talk box thing which was done with ReFX Slayer. Basically, it was just the talk box effect on it, which we quite liked when the drums came in. We thought, we'll just leave it like that. Just added some compression to smooth out some of the peaks that were coming along in the once the main drum and bass track started. You got a few annoying peaks, so you have like. Got them all out.
Yeah.
But apart from that, we used Zeta again. Which was this one oscillated preset we made, which was. Basically, that was just the same. I mean, we started off with just resetting the whole synth and starting up from the ground up, using a saw wave, just creating a gradual LFO on that and creating effects around that.
So with lines like that as well, do you tend to play in as much as you can and then go back and edit it, or do you actually program? Sit down and actually program note by note?
With tracks like this, we play it by hand. With the more dance floor stuff, it's usually best just just to program it in a lot of the time. But with this we played everything by hand. And we recorded some of it outside of the studio as well, like a Rose track that we did down while we were recording some horns at another studio for another track. And they had an old Rhodes in the corner, and we just thought, well,
Why not?
we're paying for it,
Yeah.
so we've got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Did the horns in like half an hour. So we had the Rose track which came in here. Muffled sound coming from it, so it compressed the hell out of it, which unfortunately brought us some noise, but we couldn't really do anything, so we just had to leave it.
And it's kind of just a sound, is it?
Yeah,
Rose,
yeah,
Rose,
yeah.
yeah, so. Is that more electric guitar in there?
That didn't actually start off as an electric guitar. That was the acoustic. That was him doing a solo on the acoustic, which we were just messing around with distortions on it just for a joke, and just thought, well, that sounds wicked when it came to that bit. So I think we sort of didn't it. Yeah, it's quite edited.
Yeah. It's got a good sound considering what it started live as.
Yeah,
Live as,
definitely.
yeah.
That was Native Instruments guitar rig, which we just put that on. Which I think is the best thing for that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did work really well. And just added the Rhodes up on the top of different bits.
So when you go in and sort of, like you did with the horns and stuff like that, do you take like a bare bones track or where you're at with it, or do you go give them something really simple to work to, or is it just literally...
Sort of record the horns?
Yeah, what do you take in to kind of, for them to work off?
We'll take in just scores.
So you do score it, right.
Yeah, and basically just give that to them to work with. Lay out the track, and basically just go through trying to make sure that they understand the sort of vibe of the track, maybe just sing the lines back and try and get it as close as we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you kind of essentially wrote the horn parts before you went?
Yeah.
You knew kind of what you were after?
We basically just did it up as samples, which we even ended up keeping in there, because we laid them behind the main horns and just kept them behind, and it just sounded a lot bigger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean we do a lot of stuff that way, just by putting it in with samples, and then if we can get another instrument to do it, or vocalist to sing a synth line or whatever, then the better for it. So, yeah.
So have you got kind of any ideas of other instruments you'd love to bring into it?
Sitar. As well as just like working with a full orchestra or choir or something would be wicked. Because at the moment we're doing a lot of that stuff with samples, but to actually get it to the real thing where we can take a score to something like a full orchestra would be wicked.
Yeah.
But apart from that, not really.
Okay, so in a track like that, kind of in terms of the arrangement,
Yep.
is there anything kind of fundamentally different that you do with it? Or you still kind of follow the same sort of idea of how you want it to flow?
As opposed to other tracks?
Yeah, kind of the much more kind of straightforward dance floor sort of stuff.
Yeah, I guess so, because this track progressed a lot more than our other tracks, in that the first section's completely different from the second. Like usually with drum and bass they'll be identical. But with this, I mean, the first time we do it, we've got break out into the So yeah, I mean it was a pretty different tune to the way we normally do it. I mean the bar structure on this was different again. I don't even know how many bars it is. But yeah, I mean we tried not to pay too much attention to that as well, because this album was just supposed to be something that anyone could listen to, preferably not just people who go to clubs or like drum and bass heads or whatever.
Yeah, you just want to open up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people could just be sitting in their cars, they haven't even heard of drum and bass, and go, well, I like that. And
Yeah.
That's the best way, I think. Yeah.
So also, I mean, you've got a lot of sort of soft synths and stuff like that running. Do you just, once you've got an idea, do you bounce it down straight away, or do you kind of tend to work as far as you can with it as that, and then, or do you leave it, I mean, are you in a position where to leave it all running?
Sometimes, I mean with this, a lot of it's, well, most of the beats started off as audio, so we can leave that.
Yeah.
But with the synths in this track, I mean, it's not too heavy. For our normal tracks anyway, I mean the CPU is only going at 60%, so
Yeah.
which is pretty good. But I mean, I think we've left all of the synths in there, just running. So
Yeah.
the power chords helped a lot with that as well.
It takes the strain off it, yeah.
Yeah, especially with things like just compressors and EQs, just being able to load them onto the power core and not have them running with any synths or anything's a lot better.
Yeah.
Do you use the power core reverbs quite a lot as well, or they tend to be quite popular with?
I don't like the mega verb on it, but the classic verb on it's really good, I think. And as well the new thing that they've released, the VSS3, which is wicked. Probably the best I think I've heard on available on plugin format. So. Yeah, but mainly those two. So.
And do you kind of, if you're hearing tracks out and you kind of hear something and you think, oh yeah, do you come back and kind of sit down and think, well, not necessarily to use it, but you're kind of curiosity if nothing else, like trying to figure out.
Yeah, that stuff drives you mental.
Yeah.
Like, if you hear a track or any specific sound that's heavier than the one in yours, literally just go home and spend that amount of time trying to get it out.
You get it, yeah.
But I mean, even if you don't get it, it usually turns into something that's...
Yeah, leads you to something else.
Yeah. I mean, that could start up a whole new track anyway. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's good whatever happens, but 6 out of 10 times we'll get it, and the rest will just leave and never remember. Yeah.
What sort of time would you say you generally sort of take to do a track from start to finish? Obviously it varies quite a lot, but are there some that you can do, literally like 1 or 2 days, and others that take months and months, or do you around the same sort of time frame?
It depends, I guess. I mean, with this and quite a few other tracks, we tend to, well, the more musical one, write the music for it and then leave it for a while until we know what we want to do with it. And then closer to the finishing day, we'll just get the mix ready, fit in all the different parts and try and arrange it, and then do a final mix after that. So I'd say that'd probably usually take about maybe we'll start it like at the beginning of 2 months and then finish it at the end. But we're not working on that track for the whole time, so it's fairly split up.
Yeah.
But I mean, with things like the Voodoo People remix, that was 2 days. Because we had to. But, I mean, sometimes that works best, just spur of the moment stuff.
Yeah.
It can work really well.
Is your approach to sort of remixing quite different to what it be sort of to your own tracks, or do you actually recreated the parts for the Voodoo People one, didn't you, or you actually use any of the originals, or?
Used parts of the original, like that main distorted guitar. We used, but I mean, we try and put, as long as we like the track, we try and put as much work as we can into it, and just try not to do tracks which we don't like. But yeah, we try and put as much work into it as other tracks. I mean, sometimes they end up better than what we want to do for ourselves, which isn't the one.
Yeah. But does it kind of lead you on to, you know, the stuff that you do doing a remix kind of lead you on to ideas for
Yeah,
other
definitely.
tracks? You can't come out thinking, oh, that's
Definitely, there might be something you liked in that track that you wouldn't have thought of if you'd been starting from scratch. I mean, just something like using someone's synth sound, or you know, a break they've used, and building your track around that can just help you think of heaps of ideas. So it does help a lot. But I mean, there's other tracks that can take something like 6 months from when we start it to when we finish it, which I don't really like to do, but yeah, it does happen. Cool. Definitely the biggest project we've done so far, in that it started off as about 3 different tunes and then formed into one at the end of it. But mainly started off with a riff that we had, which I hated, but Gaz and Fresh forced me to keep it in, but then I liked it, so it's all good. But we start off with this riff basically. Too much stuff going on, so the hard drive cuts out. And then this thing was mainly based around sound, so we had that lead synth, and then we made this growling synth which we had on top of it, which was this thing. And yeah, I mean the most important thing for this track was the drums, because we wanted a more rock feel to them, but it's a pretty fine line in that with drum and bass between just doing it really cheesily or just putting a rock element into it, which we wanted to do. So a lot of that came just from using and electronic kits. So and also a lot of layering stuff. I mean, there's about 5 snares there, and all basically adding different parts to the spectrum. Like we'll have one giving it the low end punch. We'll have one giving it maybe like some sizzle on the top end. We'll have one giving it some crack on the top end. Have one filling out the mid range, and one just acting as a filler for a break or something. But I mean that can get pretty messy, but a lot of the time that it seems to work really well. I mean, in the end we came up with so there's a lot of stuff going on, but since we're supposed to have like a real rock feel to it, we tried to keep the step as simple as possible and not have too many things playing mad things at once.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is a lot of stuff in there, like just trying to find it. I mean, those are the main symbols for the track, that and some others.
So when you're kind of layering that number of sounds over it, did you sort of EQ anything, or did you just?
Yeah, well, a lot of the stuff has some EQ on it, but mainly we use some split band compression, and basically just try and isolate the parts that we want, and leave the parts that we don't want out of the mix without making it sound too unnatural. Because if you overdo it, it just sounds a bit too much like things are split into bands, and it doesn't work. So I mean, there's a lot of compressing of certain frequencies which we don't want to get into the mix, but we still want to have there, so they don't interfere with the punch of the drums or anything. I mean things like this, which was a hip hop beat that we used for the intro, was actually still used in the main part of the drop. So we have that. And then maybe we would have decided we didn't want the mid range or something. You just squash it out a bit like that. But yeah, it's basically just making sure things don't interfere with each other, and then and also trying to work on a mix of the individual group as well. So yeah, it's basically just a sum of all parts thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a bit more about sort of suppressing stuff rather than actually cutting it out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. 'Cause, I mean, when we've cut stuff drastically in the past, it just hasn't worked. So we find more and more that just suppressing it more than cutting it.
Yeah. I guess it allows you to bring things back in if you want to. It's not quite so extreme, is it? So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Do you want to play the whole kind of whole rigging track together?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Hit the whole thing kind of.
So yeah, I mean, when it comes together, it sounds
Yeah.
pretty simple.
Yeah. But it's just blending it all.
Yeah, yeah. It's just trying to create that larger than life sort of sound with different parts. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is also in the effects like surrounding the track. Like, apart from the main bass and the lead synths, we'll have like the effects section for this was huge. So we ended up bouncing like what must have been about 40 channels full of effects just down to single effects channels, and then putting them over the top. So might have had. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Including a sample that we found off a Nutrigrain cereal ad in Australia. This is the Iron Man sample. Here it is. Kind of lo-fi, but we had to use it.
Yeah.
But you hear it in the mix.
I didn't have all that other shit on that.
A lot of different synths and sounds being used together as well, which was a nightmare to try and fit everything together. So there was just a lot of stuff going on which had exactly the same frequency range, and the trick was just trying to blend it in a way that they both stuck out in a club and wouldn't just sound like a complete mess. But this is just like the synths and instruments track for it. stuff out with guitars or wherever we can. So there's. Hold on. So I mean, when that's in the mix, you can't even hear it, but again, it's just the sum of all parts thing. Again, it's just the sort of stuff which you might not even hear at first, but it's the sounds which, like, you suddenly take them away and you can notice something's missing, and that's the most important thing, I think.
So where did all the synths come from? What are you kind of using for?
All of these had to be balanced into audio because it just got too much. But these two main synths were the virus on the power core and the Imposca. The main grinding sort of sound, that was a synth which I made in Zeta and then loaded into Halion and just messed around with it in there. Maybe stretched it a bit or whatever, but
So when you making a sound like that, and like you say you put it into Halion, do you just literally take the riff, the part that you bounce that part down and then load that in, or do you actually kind of multi-sample it and then put it back into that to play it back?
Usually, if we've got a sound that we like, it's always multi-sample. We'll start with like C0 on the keyboard and just work all the way up. That was the case with this main bit. That like every now and then there was a multi-sample, and then for phrases like this, they're just pre-made. So just a combination of both. Yeah.
So I guess it means you can go back and rework from that point again with that sound.
Yeah, we'll just try, when we take something out, just try and save the source files for it so we can come back to it if we want. And then if we need to change it, we'll just export that sound again, bring it into the new project. So there's always like a master project which we'll use, and then maybe a project for drums, or maybe a project for synths, and then we'll try and bring it back in if that works.
Yeah, keep it all a bit more manageable rather than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since the freeze on Cubase keeps freezing up. Apart from that, it's great.
Cool. Right, I'm going to stop and change the tapes.